Hello, Blake. I'm a comics collector. I collect art. I'm an artist. I like movies. I'm a cinephile. And I do reviews. And this is my review for
The Man of Steel #1.
The first issue of the classic series from DC Comics that attempted and succeeded, in my opinion, in breathing new life into a superhero character that had been around since the 1930s. Okay, I will admit this from the start. John Byrne has always been my favorite comic book artist, and he was basically brought in by DC Comics editorial to make the character popular again, i.e. to sell more comics. There were other writers involved in Superman's revamp, such as Marv Wolfman and Dick Giordano, but this was mainly Byrne's baby. Byrne obviously was the writer and penciler. Giordano was the inker, Tom Zucco handled the colors, John Costanza lettered the book, and Andy Helfer was the editor. Byrne's version of the character was a collection of what had come before, drawing from the George Reeves television show, from Byrne's childhood, Kurt Swan's legendary run, and I think most importantly from the original Richard Donner film starring Christopher Reeve that Byrne has said that he had watched 112 times. Literally. Before I go any further, I have to mention the covers for the first issue. This was the first time, at least from the big two, that a comic was released with two covers. I think this was the first variant cover that was ever published also, but I could be wrong. And coincidentally, I think when this was released in 1986, it was the first time that I had ever gone to a comic book store. And of course, I would pick that one up because I was already a fan of John Byrne. The normal cover had Clark Kent pulling open his shirt to reveal the Superman logo, as you can see, along with the rocket ship from Krypton. And that would set up a motif of having one of the more important characters of the Superman mythos to the right, and then an action shot in the background. The following 5 issues of the series would have Lois Lane, fiery reporter and love interest, Batman, the other iconic flagship character for DC, Lex Luthor, Superman's arch nemesis, and so on and so forth. The action in the background would always pertain to something in the book. So there was a theme going, but the variant cover for the first issue with the close-up of the logo being revealed from beneath Clark Kent's civilian duds was, for me, maybe the best and most clever cover that has ever graced a Superman book. I'm sure there are probably covers that are better illustrated. I mean, they have cover artists that work on one cover for days, if not weeks now, whereas John Byrne probably cranked this out in a few minutes, but it's the essence of Superman boiled down to a very simple, iconic design. And I'm not usually a variant cover fan because a lot of times the cover is just a pretty drawing that really has nothing to do with anything going on inside the book, but I think this one captures the idea of not just Superman, but the superhero genre in general. So the first issue of The Man of Steel is an origin story. The prologue takes place on the dying planet of Krypton, and Jor-El, possibly a leader or a scientist of the Kryptonians, has, to his wife's horror, been preparing to send their son off into space. But their civilization is being destroyed by radiation, and he is sure that the planet is on the brink of a planet-killing explosion. And she's even more horrified when she sees that the ship's destination will be Earth, where the inhabitants, who look almost identical to Kryptonians as luck would have it, and are so primitive that sometimes they don't even wear shirts. He explains to her that their son will thrive instead of dying out in space because the yellow sun of Earth's solar system will give him unheard of physical powers. He only just manages to send their son into space as the explosions begin and destroys their homeworld. Byrne later acknowledged that this prologue was Dick Giordano's main contribution to the story, and maybe his only contribution to the story, but upon reflection, he regretted that he didn't start the story with Chapter 1 that introduced Clark Kent as a high school football star. I agree with that, since this could have had a much bigger impact later in the story, and maybe would have fit better in the 6th issue. I do also think, though, that having Clark as a football star was kind of a mistake. In the 1978 film, it depicted Clark Kent as a frustrated team manager who knew he could be better than any of the other players, but is consoled by his father, telling him that he knows that Clark is there for a reason, and it isn't for scoring touchdowns. In Byrne's version, he's more admonished for his football exploits, but you would think he would have made this point after Clark's first game, or maybe when he tried out for the team, and not after their last game of the season. I'm assuming it isn't the state championship, because it's never referred to as that, but it's possible that none of the nerds in editorial or Byrne knew anything about American football. I think Byrne was Canadian at the time. And it kind of makes me laugh that on the scoreboard it says 52-0, while the game announcer says that Clark is rushing to his 10th touchdown of the day. Well, you get 6 points for a touchdown, then you get either an extra point or a 2-point conversion, unless you're in the XFL, but if they had scored 9 touchdowns, 6 times 9 would be 54, and that's assuming their kicker missed every single extra point. So somehow they had 2 points taken away, 54 minus 2, so I don't know. I can't explain it. So Clark Kent, star football player, is confused as to why his dad isn't happy about him playing so well, and he's even shocked when Pa Kent takes him out to a field where he shows him the rocket that carried Clark to Earth. And afterwards, we get a recounting by Clark's dad of his son's unusual background and the discovery of his superpowers over the years. And there's some little details foreshadowing future events that will occur in Superman #1 on down the line. So all of this makes Clark decide that it's time for him to go see the larger world, where he feels like he can help people and do so selflessly. So it cuts to 7 years later, and Clark has been doing good deeds anonymously until the Kents pick up their local paper one day to find Clark has finally made front page news. Clark saves an experimental space shuttle that just happens to have intrepid Daily Planet reporter Lois Lane aboard, that has a mid-air collision with a smaller plane, and that establishes the story trope of Lois Lane getting herself into trouble and having to be saved by Superman. I think there is a great touch that where Byrne depicts Clark with his godlike superpowers being completely overwhelmed by all the attention that he gets from rescuing the experimental plane and Lois, so much so that he has to seek the solace of his parents back in Smallville. The last bit of the story depicts the Kents coming up with the Superman persona, with the name taken from the newspaper headline that introduced him to the world. And I have nitpicked a few things from this issue, but I want to make clear that I love this comic book and the series, and there's no cynicism or trying to make the character darker. It really is just great stuff. Just like I said with the cover, it's great stuff. I think the people at DC brought in this hotshot artist John Byrne, and they stick him in the lineup and are expecting big things from him, and then just hits a home run. It rejuvenated the character. John Byrne once called it low key. There wasn't much action, no pun intended, but it was a professionally told reintroduction to a character that everyone knew well already, and maybe made the Kryptonian a little more accessible, a little more human. I strongly recommend The Man of Steel if you're a comics fan. For me, it stands out amongst a myriad of books that I have collected in my lifetime, and I think it still holds up pretty well. And that's it, my first review. I hope I didn't bore you too much, and I hope you'll come back for the next one. Thanks for watching. And stay well.